Tonight, we peel back the gilded layers of history to uncover a secret gospelone, so powerful it trembled the pillars of power in Rome. This is not a story of saints and miracles alone, but of faith's shadowed corners, where beauty and darkness dance together. Imagine candlelight flickering against ancient stone, whispers carried through vaults where hidden truths lay silent for centuries. If you're drawn to these journeys where courage meets conspiracy, please like and subscribe, but only if your heart truly stirs. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below so we can feel that quiet connection stretching around the world. Now, dim your lights. Let a soft breeze or gentle white noise carry you in. And join me as we step into a tale of forbidden words, unwavering conviction, and the secrets that dared to challenge the Vatican itself. In the heart of Rome, where echoing vaults whisper the prayers of martyrs, Dr. Marcella Vieri made a discovery that would rewrite ecclesiastical history. In the spring of 2025, during a sanctioned restoration of the Catacombs of Callixtus, an early Christian burial network used from the 2nd to the 5th century, Marcella uncovered a sealed chamber concealed behind centuries-old masonry. Inside lay fragments of a bound manuscript wrapped in linen so fragile that a single touch might have scattered its contents to dust. The Catacombs of Callixtus are well documented by church historians and archaeologists. Pope Callixtus I consecrated them around the year 220 CE, and they remained in use until the Gothic invasions in the early 400s CE. Yet, no record, neither in the Acts of the Council of Carthage nor in later pontifical catalogues, suggested the survival of any non-canonical gospel within these subterranean aisles. As Marcella peeled back layers of grime, she found inked lines in a script resembling 4th century Latin uncials, reminiscent of the Codex Sinaiticus and other mid-4th century texts. Each stroke seemed to echo the theological debates of the era, when Arianism and Trinitarian doctrine clashed under the shadow of Roman emperors. In that silent chamber, Marcella felt the weight of both faith and fear. To hold a gospel that had escaped every known index of heresies since the time of Athanasius was to possess a text condemned by synods long ago, but never officially accounted for among the lost works of early Christianity. The discovery raised questions as ancient as the stones above her head. What truths had been silenced? And why had the Church Fathers chosen to bury this gospel in darkness, rather than allow its words to illuminate the faithful? When Marcella brought the fragile fragments to the Vatican Library Conservation Lab, a team of paleographers and chemists gathered around the workbench to examine what appeared to be a previously unknown gospel. The text was penned on vellum calfskin, prepared through centuries-old techniques rather than ordinary papyrus, and its condition suggested deliberate preservation. Radiocarbon analysis performed at the University of Oxford's Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit dated the parchment to somewhere between 350 and 380 CE, a period when church councils were fiercely debating which Christian writings should be deemed canonical. Scholars compared the ink composition against samples from the Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus, both compiled in the mid-4th century, and found striking similarities in the use of iron gall ink, mixed with soot and vegetable tannins. Under ultraviolet fluorescence, erased palimpsest markings became visible in the margins, hinting that an earlier text had been scraped away to make room for the gospel. This practice was common in places where parchment was scarce, yet no known palimpsest contained such a gospel. Marcella's team also noted stylistic cues in the script that aligned with scribal hands active in Alexandria and Rome around the time of the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. The lettering bore slight traits of Coptic influence, suggesting an Egyptian origin for at least some portions. Meanwhile, marginal glosses in Greek letters referenced passages of the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Thomas, another text excluded from official canon by Athanasius's festal letter of 367 CE, which listed accepted scriptures for liturgical reading. If these annotations were authentic, they provided direct evidence that early communities circulated and debated this gospel alongside familiar texts. As Marcella gently turned each parchment leaf under a stereoscopic microscope, she realized that every meticulous correction and every crossed-out phrase revealed a living conversation among early Christians. The Gospel's theology diverged from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John by emphasizing the equality of all believers and depicting Jesus addressing women as undisguised witnesses to resurrection. Such ideas would have been considered dangerously heretical by 4th-century bishops determined to unify doctrine. Now, after 16 centuries hidden away beneath catacombs and buried in palimpsest, the forbidden gospel was ready to speak once more. Dr. Marcella Vieri understood the peril that accompanied her discovery the moment she locked the lab door behind her. The manuscript fragments rested in a climate-controlled vault, but her mind raced with the implications of revealing a gospel that challenged centuries of doctrine. She devised a veil of secrecy, confiding only in Dr. Luca Benedetti, a respected theologian whose expertise spanned early Christian sects. Together, they created a false inventory for the Vatican archives, labeling the fragments as 4th-century liturgical notes, a description bland enough to deter casual scrutiny. Meanwhile, Marcella cataloged each folio, photographing illuminated initials and noting cryptic annotations that spoke of the children of light and sacred sisters, phrases absent from any recognized New Testament text. Their clandestine collaboration extended beyond the Vatican's reading rooms. Under cover of dusk, Marcella and Luca met in a derelict monastery on Rome's outskirts, where dust motes danced in narrow shafts of pale moonlight. There, they laid out high-resolution prints on a wooden table scarred by centuries of prayer and neglect. Luca traced his finger along passages that reimagined the Lord's Prayer as an egalitarian invocation, omitting references to patriarchal authority in favor of communal stewardship. Marcella noted tremors in his voice as he whispered, "If this gospel's authenticity holds, its impact on contemporary theology will be seismic." Their voices fell silent when distant church bells tolled the Angelus, a reminder that their work defied an institution accustomed to silence and orthodoxy. Back in her apartment, Marcella drafted a confidential memorandum outlining the gospel's provenance, radiocarbon results, and paleographic parallels. She emailed the report to 2 trusted colleagues at Oxford and Harvard, each renowned for rigorous peer review of ancient texts. Hours later, encrypted replies confirmed their astonishment. Both institutions agreed the vellum date, ink composition, and scribal style were beyond reproach. They urged caution, citing the Vatican's history of suppressing uncomfortable revelations from Galileo's heliocentrism to the Aleppo Codex's disputed ownership, yet both agreed that the gospel demanded scholarly publication. As Marcella contemplated the next move, she felt the weight of secrecy and responsibility press upon her. She had become the custodian of a text that could ignite both wonder and outrage. The scholar's secret, once hidden, could no longer be contained. In the slender margins of the forbidden gospel, Dr. Marcella Vieri discovered something far more astonishing than the text itself: a cipher painstakingly woven into the faded annotations. Beneath the glosses that referenced John and Thomas lay a series of tiny dots and lines subtle enough to evade the casual eye, but deliberate in their recurrence. Marcella enlisted the help of Professor Elena Russo, a cryptologist specializing in ancient scripts, to decipher these marginalia. Over the course of weeks, they mapped patterns in the dots that corresponded to a simple substitution cipher, revealing phrases in classical Greek that had been concealed from unscrupulous church elders. One message translated as, "Seek the voice of Mary," another as, "Truth lies where power fears to tread." These cryptic directives suggested that early copyists had not only preserved this gospel, but had also hidden a secondary layer of meaning, a call to question established authority. Elena's analysis traced the cipher's origins to the work of 4th-century Christian mystics in Antioch, where coded messages were exchanged to protect unorthodox teachings during periods of persecution. The margins thus became a lifeline, guiding trusted readers to perform theological inquiries far bolder than any public debate in synods overseen by imperial commissioners. As Marcella pored over ultraviolet photographs of the manuscript, she realized that this cipher had eluded every Vatican scholar for centuries. It was a silent rebellion, inked in the very parchment, offering clues to a community that valued spiritual equality over hierarchical decree. Word of the cipher spread slowly through Marcella's inner circle, inspiring both exhilaration and trepidation. Luca Benedetti marveled at the ingenuity of early Christian dissenters, while chief archivists grew uneasy at the prospect that their institution might have unknowingly safeguarded subversive secrets. For Marcella, the discovery reinforced a profound truth. History is shaped not only by what is written in plain sight, but also by what is hidden in the whispers between the lines. And in those margins lay a testament to a courageous-coded invitation to seek a gospel that dared to challenge the world's greatest ecclesiastical power. Late one evening, beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Vatican Library's archival hall, Dr. Marcella Vieri and Professor Elena Russo worked by the dim glow of portable lamps. Towering shelves of ancient codices loomed around them, each spine whispering centuries of guarded knowledge. Marcella carefully unrolled a fragment of the forbidden gospel on a polished oak table, while Elena adjusted a digital scanner to capture high-resolution images of the ciphered margins. The air was heavy with the scent of aged vellum and dust, and the hush was so absolute that even the slightest rustle of parchment echoed like a thunderclap. They knew that if anyone discovered their presence, the repercussions could be catastrophic. As Marcella examined an illuminated initial, she noticed a faint trace of red pigment that aligned precisely with the cipher dots. Under low-angled light, the pigment formed a tiny symbol resembling an alpha laid inside a circle. Elena traced her gloved fingertip along the symbol as Marcella whispered that it matched markings found in an early Christian chapel in Antioch, where secret gatherings once took place. Their voices fell silent as footsteps approached in the corridor outside. Marcella closed the fragment, slid it into a protective sleeve, and motioned Elena to pack away the scanner. Heartbeats pounded in their ears as a lone custodian passed by on his nightly rounds, oblivious to the revelation that had just occurred in the shadows. Once the corridor lay empty again, Marcella allowed herself a slow breath. She and Elena reviewed the images on a secure tablet, piecing together a hidden note that read, "Seek where the candles burn lowest." The phrase hinted at a later chapter in the manuscript that referenced an underground chapel beneath the basilica itself. Realizing the archive held more than static history, they felt both exhilaration and dread. In that sacred space where countless texts had been catalogued and preserved, they were rewriting the story of Christianity's earliest debates. The night at the archivist's hall became a defining moment, one where curiosity and caution collided amid the silent guardians of the past. Under the marble arches of the Vatican's Scala Regia, a hidden network of prelates and palace officials convened to neutralize any threat posed by the newly surfaced gospel. The Scala Regia, designed by Bernini in the 17th century, seemed an unlikely setting for secret meetings, yet its elegant twist of steps and grand vistas provided perfect cover. Here, beneath tapestries depicting triumphs of papal power, a cadre of influential cardinals met in hushed tones. Among them was Cardinal Pietro Aldobrandini, a scion of a family entwined with both papal patronage and political intrigue since the early 1600s. He presided over the gatherings, his stalwart gaze betraying concern that the Gospel's account of women at the heart of Christ's ministry would undermine centuries of clerical authority. Their strategy unfolded methodically. First, they directed a discreet inquiry to the prefecture of the Vatican Library, questioning the provenance of the liturgical notes Marcella had submitted. Simultaneously, operatives within the Secretariat of State circulated rumors of faulty carbon dating at Oxford, sowing doubt among international scholars. By the time Marcella received an official letter requesting further clarification of her findings, the conspirators had already secured an audience with the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the modern successor to the Inquisition, founded by Pope Paul III in 1542. They urged caution, warning that any hint of doctrinal error could spark a schism reminiscent of the Reformation's upheaval. At twilight, Cardinal Aldobrandini and his allies moved to locate and seize the fragments before publication. They dispatched archivists to Marcella's lab under the pretense of routine preservation checks, intending to safeguard the Gospel in an undisclosed location. Aware of the danger, Marcella encrypted her digital transcriptions and hid the physical fragments within false panels of her private office. Yet she knew the Vatican's resources were vast, and its resolve formidable. In that moment, the silent staircase became an arena of power where belief, politics, and preservation collided. The conspirators believed they acted to protect the unity of faith. Marcella believed she fought for truth itself. In a weathered script hidden among the gospel fragments, Marcella uncovered references to letters penned by a monk named Severinus, exiled to a desert monastery in Egypt during the reign of Emperor Valens. These letters, written around 367 CE, had long been presumed lost after Severinus opposed the condemnation of unorthodox texts at the Council of Alexandria. Word spread that he'd spirited portions of the forbidden gospel across the Mediterranean before his enforced departure. Determined to trace Severinus's path, Marcella and Luca traveled to the monastery of St. Macarius in the Nitrian desert, where sandstone cells rose above endless dunes. There, a modern custodian revealed a dusty chest containing brittle papyrus fragments, once catalogued under anonymous correspondence. By lamplight in a crumbling scriptorium, Marcella gently unfurled the papyri, reading Severinus's weary hand as he described smuggling gospel verses beneath his habit and forging new alliances among desert ascetics. His words conveyed deep conviction and stark fear, recounting how adversaries within the episcopate seized his companions and burned their libraries. He implored future readers to place hidden copies in places where the living water flows, a veiled reference to the subterranean springs beneath Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre. These revelations confirmed that Severinus had not only preserved the gospel, but had deliberately seeded it across distant Christian communities. Back in Rome, Marcella compared the papyrus to the parchment fragments, noting identical theological flourishes. A reimagined beatitude proclaiming, "Blessed are the humble in heart, for they shall shape the kingdom." Such passages diverged sharply from canonical versions, underscoring why church authorities had branded Severinus a heretic. The monk's desperate hope echoed through the centuries, bridging the desert cloister to the grand halls of the Vatican. For Marcella, Severinus's letters were more than historical relics. They were testament to the courage and sacrifice that sustained forbidden truths. Each crumbling line added depth to her understanding of how the gospel had survived, carried by hands willing to risk everything for the promise of an equal and open faith. The Council of Alexandria in 388 CE convened beneath a blazing African sun, its marble hall aflame with zealous debate. Bishops from across the Mediterranean gathered at the invitation of Theophilus of Alexandria, a formidable figure determined to quell doctrinal dissent. According to surviving minutes cited in later chronicles, the forbidden gospel emerged as the focal point of heated contention. Delegates recoiled at passages depicting women as co-witnesses of the resurrection and calling for shared leadership among believers' teachings at odds with prevailing hierarchies anchored in apostolic succession. Theophilus, his gold-embroidered pallium gleaming in torchlight, denounced the text as a serpent's whisper among the flock, insisting that its removal was essential to preserve unity and orthodoxy. Marcella reconstructed the council's proceedings from 3 independent sources: an Armenian chronicle hidden in a monastic library, a Syriac fragment discovered in Tur Abdin, and marginal notes in a later Greek manuscript. All attested that on the 3rd day, bishops voted overwhelmingly to condemn and consign the gospel to eternal oblivion. Decrees ordered surviving copies burned or buried beneath consecrated ground. A lone voice, Bishop Helena of Emesa, spoke in defense of the text's call for justice and inclusion, only to be met with stern rebuke and rebounded by a vote that silenced her forever. Her fate exile to a desert retreat remains a testament to the cost of dissent. By the council's end, secret emissaries retrieved smuggled copies, ferrying them far from Alexandria's hallowed walls. Yet the gospel's verses had taken root in those who dared to read them. Marcella felt the council's echoes as she traced the condemnation acts, recognizing that the very mechanism designed to erase the text had inadvertently preserved its legend. In condemning the gospel, the Church Fathers had immortalized it, fueling the determination of future generations to recover what power sought to conceal. Long before emperors wielded crosses as banners of state, communities across the eastern Mediterranean whispered of a gospel that dared to diverge from the accepted narrative. In the bustling port city of Antioch, Syrian merchants and Greek-speaking pilgrims encountered fragments of the forbidden text in the early 4th century, sharing its verses under the cover of night. Word of these clandestine gatherings reached Alexandria, where theology students debated the gospel's message of shared authority and spiritual equality amid the cacophony of marketplace sermons. Though exact records are scarce, 3rd and 4th century church historians, such as Eusebius and Epiphanius, alluded obliquely to heretical sects that championed the Book of Brethren, likely referencing our manuscript without naming it directly. Surviving letters from Christian communities in Edessa and Nisibis found in Syriac translations refer to a redacted gospel at the heart of heated theological disputes. One letter, dated to around the years following the Council of Nicaea, describes how a local bishop ordered public burnings of texts contradicting the apostolic voice, only to see secret believers smuggle remnants to safe houses carved into the Taurus Mountains. In Cappadocia, devout readers copied passages by torchlight, embedding them in liturgical readings for small house churches. Their underground worship shaped the devotional life of countless Christians who yearned for teachings that honored both the masculine and feminine dimensions of faith. Archaeological discoveries in present-day Turkey and Syria have unearthed pottery shards inscribed with brief gospel quotations, "Let the least among you bind the wounds of the many," and "Sing with all voices to the pottery shards, daughters of Mary." These snippets mirror the forbidden gospel's distinctive style, suggesting a once vibrant network of believers who preserved the text long after official condemnation. Marcella studied these shards under polarized light, confirming the ink and clay compositions match those used in Roman frontier settlements around 330 to 360 CE. Each broken fragment carried the echo of defiance, affirming that early heretics did more than survive, they spread the gospel's radical vision across borders and languages. A caravan of silk merchants wound its way across the desert, bearing bolts of fabric and jars of frankincense to distant monasteries. Among their cargo lay concealed scraps of the forbidden gospel, carefully wrapped in leather scroll cases to evade imperial inspectors. As trade routes shifted during the late 4th century, these itinerant traders unwittingly became carriers of a text deemed too dangerous for open circulation. In the desert settlements of Palmyra and Petra, where Christian converts formed tight-knit enclaves, local elders gathered under starlit skies to read aloud verses that spoke of a gospel born of sisters and proclaimed children of both genders as heirs to the promise. These meetings, held in crude stone chapels or hidden cisterns, fused Eastern Christian traditions with the gospel's call for spiritual parity. Such gatherings did not escape notice for long. Imperial authorities, keen to maintain unity across an empire fraying at its edges, dispatched agents to intercept caravans and interrogate merchants. Edicts circulated from Antioch to Constantinople, ordering the seizure and destruction of unauthorized scriptures. Yet, in each locale, believers smuggled fragments onward, embedding them in more resilient forms, inscribed on pottery shards, stitched into prayer cloths, or carved into the wooden beams of hidden chapels. Archaeologists working in the Negev desert have since uncovered shards bearing partial verses that match the Forbidden Gospel's unique phrasing, confirming that these desert churches sustained a living tradition even as synods condemned it. Back in Rome, news of intercepted scrolls reached the Vatican's secret archives. Officials debated whether to negotiate with foreign merchants or dispatch emissaries to destroy the contraband abroad. Cardinal Aldobrandini, fearing wider unrest, argued for an aggressive purge, while more cautious voices suggested clandestine outreach to the communities to understand the gospel's appeal. Ultimately, a covert operation was approved, but by then the text had already slipped beyond the empire's grasp, carried by networks of faith that transcended borders. In tracing these caravan routes, Marcella recognized how the gospel's survival depended on both the humble courage of desert believers and the resilience of ancient trade networks. Their willingness to risk everything merchandise, lives, and livelihood stow preserve this text illustrated a profound truth. Faith, once freed from official confines, finds its own way to flourish. A solitary figure arrived on Rome's Tiber shore under a pale dawn sky, his robes dusty from months of travel. Brother Theodorus, known among desert monks for his vigilance, carried in his satchel a single folio from the forbidden gospel, its edges torn, its script smudged by sandstorms. He'd escaped the Nitrian desert's remoteness to deliver this fragment to a secret contact inside the city. Word of his arrival reached Dr. Marcella Vieri through discreet channels, and she met him in the dimly lit courtyard of an abandoned Roman villa repurposed by scholars. Theodorus's hands trembled as he unwrapped the parchment, revealing a passage that depicted Jesus cleansing the temple alongside women disciples, a scene absent from any recognized gospel. Marcella's breath caught at the radical image. It challenged not only ecclesiastical hierarchy, but also the traditional narratives of gender roles in early Christianity. The monk's journey had been perilous. Imperial patrols monitored river crossings, and informants lurked among wayfarers. Theodorus spoke of secret meetings in hidden chapels beneath old cisterns where fellow believers memorized gospel verses so that, even if scrolls were seized, the words would endure in living memory. He recited lines forbidden by church edicts. "Let not your tongues be silenced. Let every voice echo the light," and Marcella recorded each syllable on her tablet. She realized that oral tradition had become a vital safeguard, ensuring the Gospel's teachings survived even when physical manuscripts disappeared. Their collaboration deepened as Marcella provided scientific analysis of the fragment's ink and parchment, confirming a date consistent with other recovered portions. In exchange, Theodorus taught her the rhythms of chanting these verses in Syriac language, in which many early Christian communities first encountered the text. Through his lilting recitation, she felt the Gospel's power as a living, breathing thing, not a sterile artifact confined to dusty archives. It was an act of defiance and devotion that transcended centuries. As dawn's light broke across the courtyard, Marcella understood that the monk's sacrifice echoed the courage of every believer who had carried this gospel in secret. Their shared mission to give voice to words deemed too dangerous for public proclamation had entered its next chapter. Dr. Marcella Vieri's next quest led her beneath the Grand Basilica into a network of forgotten tunnels, their walls lined with moss and the whispers of centuries. Local lore spoke of an underground chapel consecrated in the 4th century, its existence erased from official plans during renovations in the 16th century. Lantern in hand, Marcella descended narrow stone steps, each footfall echoing against damp rock. At the tunnel's end, she found a low-ceilinged chamber where the air smelled of incense long extinguished. There, embedded in the plaster behind a collapsed altar, she unearthed fragments of parchment painted with ochre fresco Essenes of women at Jesus' feet, their heads crowned in simple halos. Carefully brushing away debris, Marcella revealed scripted lines that matched phrases from the Forbidden Gospel, written in a hurried hand that suggested the scribe worked by flickering torchlight. Underneath, in faded Greek, someone had sketched a map of the tunnels, marking the chapel's sacred space and an adjacent reliquary chamber labeled in tiny script, "Here lies the testimony of Mary." This discovery confirmed an earlier annotation in the Gospel margins. "Seek beneath the shrine where no candle burns." The phrase had guided Marcella to this subterranean sanctuary, hidden for centuries beneath the very heart of Catholic worship. Her excitement was tempered by the realization that the chapel's fragile frescoes and parchment fragments needed immediate protection. Back above ground, she and Luca Benedetti coordinated with sympathetic restorers to document the site with 3D laser scanning and high-resolution photography, ensuring every detail was preserved, even if the original collapsed further. Meanwhile, Marcella carted the parchment fragments to her lab, where she began the painstaking task of stabilizing the ink and vellum. That night, as she reviewed her findings, Marcella understood how the Gospel's survival depended not only on exile and secrecy, but also on the sanctuaries hidden within Rome itself. The underground chapel had become a symbol of defiant faith and enduring refuge, where marginalized voices found space to testify. In rediscovering this holy alcove, Marcella honored those who risked everything to hide their convictions in places where no pilgrim's candle dared to shine. Within the ornate confines of his private study, Cardinal Alessio Varano wrestled with a turmoil that stained his crimson robes. Appointed to the College of Cardinals under Pope Benedict XVI's Reformed Commission, Varano was respected for his theological acumen and pastoral care. Yet when he first examined Marcella's digital excerpts of the Forbidden Gospel, he felt the ground shift beneath his faith. In passages that spoke of shared spiritual authority and the recognition of female disciples as equals, Varano discovered teachings that resonated with the marginalized voices he had long championed in silent counsel. Late into the night, he pored over translation notes, comparing the Gospel's text with his own annotations from Vatican councils. Each phrase, "Blessed are those who serve without rank," and "Let every soul man and woman alike, proclaimed the truth, confronted him with questions he had never dared voice. Was it possible that the Church's hierarchy, shaped over millennia, had overlooked essential truths? He recalled conversations with seminarians who struggled to reconcile strict clerical structures with the inclusive spirit of the Gospels he preached each Sunday. Now, here in this hidden manuscript was evidence that early Christians had embraced a far more egalitarian vision. By dawn, Varano summoned the courage to seek an audience with his confessor, Monsignor Luigi Ferrara, a humble priest known for his discretion. In the hush of the confessional chapel, he confessed his doubts. The Gospel's radical theology challenged centuries of doctrine and threatened to ignite schism. Monsignor Ferrara listened without judgment before advising caution and prayer. "Truth," he whispered, "must be weighed with both heart and mind." Returning to his study, Varano drafted a memorandum addressed to the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. He framed his appeal not as rebellion, but as a pastoral concern. The Gospel's teachings could heal divisions and restore a sense of shared dignity among the faithful. Yet even as he poised his pen, he hesitated, aware that such advocacy risked censure or worse, ecclesiastical exile. In that moment of agonized reflection, Cardinal Varano embodied the dilemma at the heart of the forbidden gospel, whether to protect institutional unity or to honor a deeper call for justice that history had nearly expunged. Dr. Marcella Vieri's meticulous research uncovered a collection of encrypted letters exchanged between early Christian scribes' messages so carefully concealed that generations of archivists overlooked them. These letters, preserved within the bindings of other church documents, bore ciphers similar to those she and Professor Russo had already cracked in the gospel margins. Translated into modern notation, they revealed instructions for locating hidden portions of the text and diagrams, mapping secret vaults beneath prominent churches in Rome and Constantinople. One missive described a hidden reliquary beneath Santa Prassede, marked by a mosaic tile depicting a lamb with a reversed fluting pattern. Another referred cryptically to a sealed chamber behind 12 steps, later identified as a subterranean crypt beneath San Clemente, accessible only to those who knew the key phrase. To authenticate these letters, Marcella collaborated with Dr. Thomas Nguyen, a specialist in Byzantine manuscripts at the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris. Nguyen's team employed multispectral imaging to unveil faint undertext earlier writings scraped away to make room for official synodal decrees. Beneath these layers lay the encrypted correspondence, penned in a hurried hand using indigo-dyed ink. Linguistic analysis revealed that the scribes used a hybrid code blending Greek acrophony with rudimentary numeric ciphers techniques common among clandestine intellectual circles in late antiquity. Armed with precise coordinates derived from the letters, Marcella and Luca guided an expedition into the catacombs beneath San Clemente. Lanterns illuminated ancient frescoes of apostles and martyrs as they descended narrow stairways. At the 12th step, Marcella found a stone slab edged with inconspicuous notches matching the encrypted instructions. With careful precision, she manipulated the notches and felt a soft click. The slab shifted, revealing a hidden niche containing a sealed ceramic jar. Inside lay minute scrapings of the gospel text, fragments too small for official cataloging but vital to reconstructing the complete manuscript. Victorious, yet solemn, Marcella realized that each decrypted letter represented not only a map to buried words, but also testimony to the courage of those who risked everything to preserve the gospel. In those encrypted correspondences, she found a testament to a faith that refused erasure, a faith written in code beneath the stones of history. In hushed corridors lined with oak paneling and flickering candelabras, the shadow of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith loomed over anyone accused of heresy. Marcella uncovered record books from a 17th century Inquisition trial against a German theologian, Johann Bauer, who had publicly referenced verses from the Forbidden Gospel during a sermon in 1623. The trial transcripts, penned in ornate Baroque script, described Bauer's trembling voice as he read a passage affirming that all who serve in love stand equal before the divine. Church prosecutors, citing decrees that traced back to the Council of Alexandria, accused him of spreading unorthodox doctrine. Bauer defended himself by claiming lineage to a secret tradition of faith, but when witnesses testified to hidden meetings he'd conducted in taverns outside Mainz, the tribunal condemned him. He was stripped of his teaching license, imprisoned in the fortress of the Papal States, and his writings ordered burned. Marcella examined a surviving fragment of Bauer's diary, smuggled out by a sympathetic Dominican friar. In it, Bauer reflected on the irony that the gospelants buried to protect doctrinal purity had become a beacon of hope to those who believed institutional authority had grown corrupt. His anguish was palpable as he described the roaring flames that consumed his sermon notes and the fearful silence that followed. Despite the tribunal's efforts, fragments of his diary and clandestine copies of the Gospel continued to circulate among scholars in Leiden and Paris, preserved by dissenters who risked excommunication to safeguard Bauer's testament. As Marcella transcribed the trial records, she noted parallels between Bauer's ordeal and earlier inquisitions. Both sought to eliminate a text that spoke of equality in communal leadership, fearing its message might unravel long-held hierarchies. With each inked line she digitized, Marcella felt the weight of persecution borne by generations of believers. She knew that publishing Bauer's story would resurrect uncomfortable truths about the Church's history of silencing dissent. Yet she also recognized the power of bearing witness to those trials of conscience and faith. In preserving the memory of Johann Bauer's trial by Inquisition, Marcella honored a lineage of courage that transformed the Forbidden Gospel from a hidden manuscript into a catalyst for contemplation across centuries. Deep within a modest scriptorium in a secluded English priory, an anonymous scribe labored by candlelight to reproduce passages of the Forbidden Gospel. His identity vanished from history, recorded only as Brother Aelius in a faded ledger, but his meticulous work survives in 3 extant manuscripts now housed at Cambridge's Parker Library. Marcella studied high-resolution facsimiles, noting the elegant Caroline minuscule scripta clear marker of late 9th century originend, the use of reddish-violet ink for key theological phrases. This scribe had taken great care to include marginal annotations, instructing future readers how to interpret contested passages, effectively serving as both copyist and commentator. The marginalia reveal insights into why the Gospel's teachings endured. In one manuscript, Aelius corrected a line describing the children of light to emphasize communal stewardship, clarifying that all are called to tend the flame, not merely those ordained. In another, he quoted a now-lost homily by a bishop of York, asserting that spiritual equality was rooted in Christ's own ministry. These glosses demonstrated a sophisticated engagement with the text, not simply rote copying. Brother Aelius's careful emendations bridged the gap between the original 4th century composition and the theological debates of the Carolingian Renaissance. Marcella traveled to Cambridge to examine the manuscripts firsthand, feeling a profound connection as she gently turned each vellum leaf. The scribe's elegant penmanship contrasted starkly with the manuscript's tumultuous histories, very existence threatened by church reforms under Charlemagne, who strove for doctrinal uniformity and sanctioned the removal of heterodox works. Yet Aelius's devotion preserved the Gospel's core message, a vision of faith inclusive of all believers. His act of clandestine copying, undertaken at risk of censure, underscored the lengths to which devoted individuals went to safeguard a text deemed too radical for official acknowledgement. As Marcella traced the scribe's annotations, she felt the weight of his silent testimony. Though his name remains unknown, Brother Aelius endures in every carefully formed letter and every deliberate correction. His hidden hand ensured that the forbidden gospel would survive and one day resurface carried forward by those willing to write truth in the margins of orthodoxy. Beneath the sanctified halls of the Lateran Basilica, Marcella discovered a map tucked inside a 16th-century Bindinga map, drawn in sanguine ink that depicted a hidden chamber below the left transept. Local tradition spoke of a reliquary concealed during the Avignon papacy to protect sacred treasures from the perils of schism, but no official plans ever recorded a subterranean crypt in this location. With Vatican engineers' reluctant approval, Marcella and Luca Benedetti descended a narrow service stairway carved into the stone wall. Their lanterns illuminated peeling fresco fragments of early papal liturgies as they inched toward what appeared to be a sealed door engraved with the Chi-Rho symbol. When they pried the door open, a rush of stale air met them, followed by the glint of metal against stone. Inside lay a small alcove where dozens of ceramic jars were arranged on marble shelves, each jar stamped with a simple cross and sealed with wax. In one jar, Marcella found a perfectly preserved piece of the forbidden gospel, a small vellum fragment folded and bound by sinew, bearing a late 6th-century script. The ink remained remarkably intact, and beneath it lay a faint undertext in Gothic script evidence that early custodians repurposed an existing liturgical document to preserve this precious gospel portion. As Marcella carefully unpacked the fragment, she noted that the text described an episode in which Jesus taught by the river Tiber itself, welcoming all citizen slaves and free men and women to gather at his feet. This localized narrative adaptation provided a powerful symbol for Romans across eras, affirming that the gospel's reach extended beyond distant Judean hills to the very streets of their city. Luca recorded every detail on his portable rig, whispering that the discovery was a bridge between divine teaching and earthly place. Their find underscored how custodians over centuries had hidden the gospel not only in desert caves and monastic vaults, but also within the very epicenter of papal authority. In that secret Lateran crypt, faith and power intersected invisibly beneath marble altars. Marcella realized that each hidden chamber they uncovered testified to the gospel's enduring resonance and the extraordinary lengths taken by believers to shield its radical message from erasure. Within the ornate wood-paneled study of Monsignor Luigi Ferrara, confidential confessions and ecclesiastical secrets found a discreet refuge. Monsignor Ferrara, once the private confessor to 3 successive pontiffs, possessed diaries dating back to the late 19th century that chronicled whispered admissions of popes wrestling with doubts and hidden revelations. When Marcella gained access to these journals under a vow of absolute discretion, she discovered entries referencing a text of sisters uncovered during Pius IX's reign. One entry recounted how the pontiff, upon reading a translation of the forbidden gospel, wept in solitude, struck by the image of Mary Magdalene, standing as the first witness to the resurrection knot, relegated to the periphery, but celebrated at the core of salvation history. Ferrara's notes described the Pope's conflicted conscience. He admired the Gospel's call for inclusivity, yet feared that publicly acknowledging it would fracture a church, already grappling with modernist controversies and secularist pressures. Under Ferrara's guidance, a secret council of theologians was convened in the Apostolic Palace to examine the text's theological merits. Their unanimous recommendation to preserve the gospel in private archives but forbid its public citation revealed the delicate balance between pastoral care and institutional stability. Marcella's heart pounded as she read about these private deliberations, realizing that even the highest echelons of church leadership had once been touched by the gospel's transformative power, only to bury their convictions to forestall unrest. Armed with Ferrara's diaries, Marcella carefully transcribed the pontifical reflections and theologians' assessments, preparing them for scholarly review. These documents provided a rare window into Vatican decision-making, showing that the conflict over the gospel was not merely theological but pastoral, struggle to reconcile the desire for reform with the imperative of unity. Monsignor Ferrara's unwavering loyalty to conscience over politics became evident in every line. His final diary entry lamented the Church's lost opportunity to embrace a more expansive vision of faith, and pledged that, one day, truth would prevail. As Marcella closed the leather-bound volume, she felt the weight of history converge upon her mission. The confessor's testimony affirmed that the forbidden gospel had shaken the Vatican's foundations more than once, leaving ripples still reverberating through corridors of power. The monastery of St. Catherine, perched at the foot of Mount Sinai, has sheltered pilgrims and manuscripts for centuries beneath its rugged walls. When Marcella arrived, the desert sun cast long shadows across the courtyard's cobblestones, and the air tasted of myrrh and history. Here, in a locked cabinet behind an iconostasis panel, she found a leather-bound codex labeled Apocrypta, its cover worn by countless hands. Inside were Syriac translations of the Forbidden Gospel, accompanied by commentary in an elegant hand, attributed to Patriarch John of Alexandria, who led the Church during the late 6th century. As Marcella gently leafed through the codex, she discovered that its translator had taken pains to adapt names and places for Eastern Christian audiences. Where the original Latin text spoke of Rome's cathedral, the Syriac version referenced the church at the foot of Sinai, situating the gospel's message of equitability in the desert monastic tradition, known for its relative acceptance of female ascetics. Marginal glosses drew parallels between the gospel's teachings and Melania the Elder's commitment to monastic community life, suggesting that women's leadership roles had once been woven more deeply into spiritual practice than later decrees acknowledged. To authenticate the codex, Marcella enlisted the aid of Brother Basileos, the monastery's chief manuscripts keeper. Under his guidance, she examined the parchment's vellum quality, noting that it matched 6th century Palestinian skins and bore watermarks consistent with quarries near Jerusalem. Infrared reflectography revealed erased notes beneath the Syriac gloss solder Greek inscriptions, condemning the text as too bold for the faithful, indicating that the codex itself had been repurposed to ensure its survival. In that hidden chamber beneath Sinai's ancient peaks, Marcella felt the gospel's transcontinental journey come full circle. From Rome's catacombs to Egypt's monasteries and now to Sinai's hallowed halls, its verses had traversed languages and landscapes, carried by communities driven by devotion and courage. As she prepared to document the codex's contents, Marcella realized that each translation and adaptation testified to the gospel's enduring resonance across Christian traditions, challenging any single authority to claim final dominion over its message. As dawn broke over the Vatican gardens, Marcella found herself drawn to a series of small stone markers set amid neatly trimmed hedges. Local gardeners regarded them as mere decorative relics, row of 12 unmarked pillars, said to commemorate nothing of note. But in a forgotten footnote from a 16th century plans registry, Marcella discovered a diagram indicating that beneath the 7th marker lay an access hatch to a subterranean vault. Slipping past morning visitors, she knelt by the moss-covered stone and pressed a concealed latch. With a soft click, a circular iron door swung inward, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. Her portable lantern cast dancing shadows as she climbed down iron rungs into a cramped mortar-brick chamber. The air was stale, filled with the faint scent of aged vellum. There, on a low plinth crafted of travertine, rested a single unadorned codex in a plain leather binding gits, cover marked only with a faint impression of a lily. Marcella gingerly opened it to find a unique version of the Forbidden Gospel. An 8th century Carolingian hand had copied and translated the text into Old High German, adapting idioms and cultural references to reach lay believers in Frankish territories. Phrases such as, "May your heart build bridges, not walls," and "Let all voices blend in one hymn," reflected a theological impulse toward unity and reconciliation amid the fracturing of Europe under feudal strains. Under careful examination, the codex revealed marginal annotations from abbots across the Rhineland, recording how the Gospel's teachings had inspired charitable workshospices for pilgrims and communal grain stores for the needy. One abbot's note spoke of reading the Gospel aloud in the castle courtyard, much to the dismay of local bishops who accused him of fomenting sedition. Yet his community thrived on generosity, a testament to the Gospel's practical power. Marcella realized that this Carolingian adaptation represented the Gospel's transformation from contested text to catalyst for social reform. Each translation and marginal note documented a living tradition that transcended doctrinal disputes, shaping Christian communities through acts of compassion. As she replaced the codex and ascended the ladder, Marcella felt the resonance of those Frankish believers, echoing in her own work and affirmation that the Forbidden Gospel's true legacy lay not in hidden vaults, but in the lives it changed across centuries. Venturing beyond the elaborate marble sanctuaries of Rome, Marcella journeyed to a remote hillside chapel near Tivoli, its battered facade half concealed by overgrown ivy. Local lore held that this modest structure once served a small community of Reformed clerics exiled during the Counter-Reformation. Inside, elongated frescoes adorned the curved apse, though most had faded beneath generations of candle soot and moisture. As Marcella cleared layers of dirt and loose plaster with a soft brush, she revealed a striking scene. Christ seated at a long table, flanked not only by the 12 apostles but also by 3 women bearing loaves and cups, their faces rendered with equal reverence. This iconography diverged from any known canonical portrayal, echoing passages in the Forbidden Gospel that celebrated women as integral participants in Christ's ministry. Under magnification, Marcella discerned an inscription in faint Latin beneath the scene, "Quis portabit lucernam ad lucem postororum," an invitation to carry the light into future generations. Beneath that, in diminutive Greek script, she found a notation naming the artist brother Thelonius, whom Marginalia, in a 15th century visitor's journal, described as an itinerant monk inspired by apocryphal texts. The chapel's walls also bore stenciled symbols, overlapping circles and interlaced vines, emblematic of unity and mutual care, rather than hierarchical distinction. Such motifs corresponded to thematic elements in the Forbidden Gospel, where communal stewardship and shared witness formed the text's heartbeat. Marcella commissioned multispectral imaging to discern hidden layers beneath the visible artwork. The resulting images revealed initial sketches in charcoal showing the women in subordinate poses, later overpainted to grant them the same prominence as the male figures. This artistic evolution suggested that Thelonius himself had wrestled with orthodox conventions before embracing a more inclusive vision, perhaps guided by a surviving portion of the gospel text. Restoration experts confirmed that the fresco pigments contained rare lapis lazuli and cinnabar, materials expensive enough to indicate that patrons financed this work in defiance of ecclesiastical censure. As Marcella documented each detail, she reflected on how art had served as a silent transmitter of suppressed theology. Where official decrees prohibited the gospel's circulation, frescoes like these offered a visual testament to its transformative power. In that humble chapel, hidden truths lay painted on plaster, bearing witness for centuries to the divine equality at the core of faith. Amid the hushed reverence of the Apostolic Palace archives, Marcella uncovered a small cache of lead seals engraved with the emblem of a secret brotherhood sworn to protect the forbidden gospel. These seals, known as bullae, once secured bundles of letters exchanged among dissenting clergy during the Avignon papacy in the early 14th century. Each bore a delicate depiction of intertwined hands beneath a crowned dove, symbolizing unity under divine guidance. Marcella consulted Vatican archivist records referencing a confraternity of the hidden word, an organization omitted from official registers, yet whispered about in the margins of 17th-century memoirs by Vatican secretaries. The lead seals had been pressed onto parchment tags, affixed to correspondence sent between Rome and Avignon during the Western Schism. When Marcella examined high-resolution scans under reflected light, she discerned minute inscriptions around the edges-scriptic abbreviations, encoding meeting dates, and secure drop-off points within papal palaces. Cross-referencing these with architectural plans, she and Luca located a concealed niche within the Palais des Papes in Avignon. There, beneath layers of mortar dated to the 15th century, they retrieved a watertight clay jar containing brittle fragments of the Gospel inscribed in Provençal dialect. This regional adaptation illustrated how the text continued to travel, integrating local linguistic idioms to resonate with marginalized believers who felt alienated by competing papal claims. Analysis of these Provençal fragments revealed unique phrasing that celebrated communal decision-making, an admonition that they who govern must be governed by mercy. Such lines stood in stark contrast to the fierce assertions of absolute authority propagated during the schism. The discovery underscored how the gospel served as a balm for fractured communities caught in the crossfire of rival popes. Its preservation by the confraternity of the hidden word demonstrated the enduring commitment of lay and clerical networks to safeguard a vision of faith rooted in compassion rather than coercion. As Marcella catalogued the seals and fragments, she reflected on the extraordinary lengths to which ordinary believers went to protect this text. From clandestine caverns beneath Rome to secret vaults in Avignon, the forbidden gospel remained alive through the devotion of those who recognized its power to transcend temporal divides and unite the faithful in mutual care. Deep within the cloistered walls of a remote Benedictine convent in Umbria, a quiet revolution was unfolding. Sister Agnes of Montealegre, revered for her skill with parchment, presided over a secret scriptorium tucked behind the choir stalls. There, under flickering candlelight, a group of nuns labored to copy and illuminate passages from the forbidden gospel, weaving its teachings into their daily prayers and work. When Marcella first received word of these clandestine efforts relayed through a network of sympathetic clergies traveled by moonlit carriage to the convent's ancient gates, arriving at dusk as the nuns prepared the evening vespers. Inside the scriptorium, the air was alive with hushed recitations. Sister Agnes guided novices in forming Caroline minuscule letters, carefully replicating the Gospel's text in red and black inks. Alongside the main text, they painted delicate marginalia, intertwining vines bearing lily blossoms, symbols of renewal and equality that echoed the Gospel's message. One illuminated folio depicted Mary Magdalene at the empty tomb, her hand extended as if inviting the viewer to bear witness. Below the scene, Agnes had penned a note in Latin. "Let this witness enfold all who seek light." Marcella observed as the nuns bound the completed folios into small gatherings called quaternions, which would be hidden inside hymnals and liturgical books. When civil authorities conducted routine inspections, ostensibly to ensure orthodoxy, they encountered only permissible psalms and prayers, unaware that beneath these everyday texts lay the sacred gospel. Sister Agnes later confided to Marcella that their community embraced the gospel's vision of shared spiritual authority as a natural extension of Benedictine values of hospitality and humility. For them, copying the text was both an act of devotion and of resistance against any form of exclusion. As Marcella departed the convent under a star-filled sky, she carried with her a bundle of newly illuminated folios. In the soft night air, she reflected on the convergence of faith and artistry, and on the courage of women who, bound by vows of silence and obedience, had used their hands to rewrite the boundaries of belief. Their quiet rebellion, hidden within cloister walls, ensured that the forbidden gospel continued to enliven hearts and minds far beyond the convent's shadowed gardens. A hush fell over the opulent hall as Marcella stood before the richly carved doors of the Vatican press office, a place where doctrine was shaped into public pronouncements. What few knew was that tucked behind thick oak panels lay a sub-basement archive containing drafts of every papal, encyclical, and apostolic letter since the 19th century. There, under orders from a reform-minded librarian, Marcella gained access to confidential press briefings prepared for the world's media in case the forbidden gospel ever surfaced. She found memoranda outlining strategies to frame the text as a harmless historical curiosity, mentioning it only in footnotes, with promises of further study rather than open acknowledgement. One briefing, dated 1963 under John XXIII's papacy, revealed that Vatican advisors had anticipated the gospel's potential to upend gender norms within the priesthood. They recommended issuing a brief statement, emphasizing tradition and hierarchical continuity, while quietly commissioning scholars to study the text's provenance. In later decades, similar plans appear alongside preparations for major ecumenical councils, suggesting that successive pontiffs viewed the gospel as a plot both countered and contained by controlling its narrative. These revelations confirmed Marcella's suspicion. The Church had long negotiated its relationship with the text in private, fearing that full disclosure might undermine centuries of vested authority. Marcella photographed every briefing note and draft statement, each page a record of institutional caution. In one margin, a press officer had scribbled, "Keep this off social media," an unsettling reminder of how modern communications could resurrect ancient controversies. She realized that the Vatican press office, once a mediator between doctrine and the faithful, had functioned as a gatekeeper of information, shaping public perception by editing not only words but eschewing pivotal truths. As Marcella departed with her digital cache, she reflected on the irony. The same office that disseminated papal wisdom to billions had also labored to obscure a gospel that spoke directly to the heart of the faithful. In documenting these internal machinations, she captured not only the story of a buried text, but also the lengths to which power will go to manage its own narrative. Hidden amid the dusty stacks of the Vatican's rare books room, Marcella discovered a leather-bound volume whose vellum cover bore the circular seal of Pope Paul V. Within, she found an illuminated transcription of the forbidden gospel rendered in Italian rather than Latin. Commissioned in 1612 by a circle of progressive clergy sympathetic to reformist ideas, this translation adapted the text for lay readers who struggled with classical languages. As Marcella carefully turned the heavy folios, she noted elegant bas-relief initials painted in gold leaf, each depicting scenes of communal service figures distributing alms, village gatherings around a shared table, and women leading prayer in a humble chapel. The translator's preface, written in flowing 17th-century script, explained his intent: to allow ordinary Catholics to encounter the gospel's call to mutual responsibility without the barriers of ecclesiastical gatekeeping. He warned that printing the work publicly was impossible under prevailing censorship laws, so he entrusted copies to trusted priests who concealed them in parish libraries and private chapels. Over time, many volumes were lost or destroyed, leaving only this one hidden behind privileged tomes. Marcella noted the irony that the Vatican, which had suppressed the Gospel's circulation, also safeguarded this precious rendition within its own walls. Under magnification, Marcella examined marginal notes keyed to verses about serving one another as brothers and sisters, discovering commentary that linked these teachings to contemporary issues of poverty and inequality in Baroque Rome. A scribe had added a footnote, recounting a clandestine reading at the Confraternity of San Carlo, which inspired the creation of soup kitchens for the city's destitute. Such initiatives prefigured modern charitable institutions, yet remained virtually unrecorded in official church histories. The volume's existence revealed a quiet lineage of social action rooted in the forbidden gospel's radical emphasis on shared dignity. Recognizing the volume's fragility, Marcella arranged for conservation experts to stabilize its binding and pigments. She also commissioned a facsimile edition on acid-free paper to share with scholars worldwide, preserving the original while extending its reach. As she closed the heavy covers, Marcella reflected on the translator's courageous vision. In rendering the gospel accessible to everyday worshippers, he had demonstrated that true reform often begins in humble acts of translation, interpretation, and service acts that ripple outward across generations. Trust, once broken, cuts deeper than any blade. Dr. Marcella Vieri learned this lesson all too well when she discovered that one of her closest collaborators had been feeding selective information to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Dr. Thomas Newman, celebrated at Oxford for his work on Byzantine manuscripts, had initially volunteered his expertise to authenticate the Forbidden Gospel's fragments. Yet, over time, Marcella noticed that his questions to the Vatican curators grew pointed and insistent, always probing for clues that might discredit her findings. One evening, she found an unsigned memorandum slipped among her notes, warning of false positives in radiocarbon dating, and urging the prefect to reevaluate the Gospel's authenticity. Heart-pounding, Marcella confronted Thomas in the hush of the conservation lab. Under sterile fluorescent lights, he confessed that his funding depended on maintaining favor with the congregation, which had promised substantial grants for projects aligned with official doctrine. He insisted his actions were intended to safeguard his career and protect her from the wrath of church authorities. Yet Marcella saw the cost. Shards of parchment once poised to challenge centuries of silence would now be eclipsed by institutional doubt. She realized that no amount of peer-reviewed proof could withstand the weight of ecclesiastical influence once a trusted insider chose power over principle. Determined to salvage the gospel's integrity, Marcella severed all ties with Thomas and backed up her raw data in encrypted archives held by independent scholars. She reached out to Dr. Elena Russo, whose cryptographic expertise remained unsullied by promises of patronage, and to Luca Benedetti, whose loyalty had never wavered. Together, they verified every date, every ink sample, and every paleographic marker, ensuring that the Gospel's provenance stood on unassailable ground. Marcella also prepared a candid report documenting Thomas's interception of her correspondence and his attempts to manipulate the Vatican's review process. In that moment of betrayal, Marcella understood that safeguarding truth required more than scientific rigor. It demanded unwavering resolve and the courage to expose even those once considered allies. As she fortified her research against further compromise, she reaffirmed her commitment to bring the forbidden gospel into the light, no matter the personal cost. The first pale light of dawn crept through Marcella's curtains as she pored over accounts of a medieval bonfire held in Florence in 1284. Civic records, discovered in the Archivio di Stato under a misfiled bundle labeled Miscellanea, recounted the dramatic public burning of texts branded heretical by the local bishopric. Among the charred remnants collected by eager apprentices was a single vellum fragment bearing the burned edges of the Forbidden Gospel's distinctive script. It was catalogued alongside works of the Cathar faith, suggesting that local authorities conflated any challenge to Orthodox hierarchy with outright heresy. Marcella traveled to Florence to inspect the blaze's aftermath firsthand. In a hidden courtyard behind the Duomo's bell tower, she unearthed a rusted iron box containing ash-speckled fragments of scripture. Under a high-resolution microscope, she isolated flecks of iron gall ink and traced its composition back to recipes common in the Tyrrhenian region during the 13th century. Careful spectral analysis revealed that the fragments once belonged to the same quarto-sized folios she had studied in Rome, confirming a direct line from Callixtus's Catacombs to the public square of medieval Florence. The historical chronicles attributed the bonfire to fears that the texts promoted social unrest by espousing egalitarian blessing teachings that resonated uncomfortably with populist uprisings threatening Florentine noble rule. One chronicler's lament described the crowd cheering as pages turned to ash, for the flames consume both parchment and pride. Marcella felt a pang of sorrow imagining voices lost to smoke and flame, yet she also recognized the resilience of faith. Despite official efforts to annihilate the gospel, fragments had endured hidden in archives, whispered by dissenters, and, ultimately, recovered by modern scholars. As she sealed the recovered pieces in archival sleeves, Marcella reflected on how history's violent attempts to quash a text had paradoxically elevated its legend. The bonfire in Florence became more than an act of censorship. It was a testament to the gospel's magnetic power, one that drew both condemnation and devotion in equal measure. Well off the beaten path, nestled among the olive groves of rural Tuscany, lies the tiny hamlet of Poggio Buonoiz, weathered stone cottages and narrow lanes largely untouched by tourists. Here, local tradition held that generations ago, a group of villagers hid scraps of a disfavored gospel within the walls of their parish church after fleeing Florence's bonfire of 1284. Marcella Vieri journeyed to Poggiobuono after uncovering a letter from an anonymous 15th-century scribe who claimed to have whispered the words of the teacher to frightened peasants. The villagers, wary at first of her scholarly presence, welcomed Marcella once she explained her mission to preserve, not desecrate, their heritage. In the church's crumbling sacristy, Marcella examined cracked plaster panels that local lore said concealed a small cavity behind the altar. Upon removing a centuries-old fragment of mortar, she revealed a modest leather pouch tied with thread. Inside were 3 brittle vellum strips, each no larger than a thumbprint, inscribed in a hurried rustic hand. The archaic Italian dialect matched that of other Tuscan adaptations Marcella had documented elsewhere, yet these fragments bore an urgency passages, invoking communal support for widows and orphans, and exhorting readers to serve as one body in humble love. The simple phrases resonated with the villagers' agricultural rhythms, suggesting that the gospel's message had been woven into sermons, prayers, and songs passed down through oral tradition. To verify the fragment's authenticity, Marcella enlisted mobile spectroscopy equipment to analyze the ink's elemental composition without damaging the delicate vellum. The results aligned with iron gall formulas used in central Italy during the late 14th and early 15th centuries. She also compared the dialect and handwriting to other local manuscripts held in the Florence State Archive, confirming their provenance. Meanwhile, The villagers shared folk songs that contained echoes of the Gospel's language stanzas about breaking bread with all and lifting every voice to heaven. Marcella recorded these melodies, recognizing them as living vestiges of the text's influence beyond parchment and palace. As dusk settled, Marcella stood amid the cypress trees shading Poggiobuono's churchyard, reflecting on the Gospel's humble survival. In these olive-strewn hills, far from Rome's grandeur and scholarly debate, ordinary people had sustained the text through song and memory. Their quiet devotion preserved teachings that challenged ecclesiastical authority and affirmed the power of faith rooted in compassion and community. In a rarely accessed corner of the apostolic palace, behind filigreed iron grills and a door marked Archivio Segreto, lies a collection of documents so sensitive they have never been catalogued in public registers. Dr. Marcella Vieri gained entry through a discreet petition to a reform-minded prefect, navigating winding corridors lined with frescoed ceilings and silent corridors. Inside, long oak shelves held vellum scrolls, leather-bound dossiers, and bundles of correspondence sealed with the red wax of successive popes. Among these treasures, Marcella discovered a faded parchment labeled De Libri Occultis, of the hidden books, which, when unrolled, revealed an inventory of over 50 non-canonical texts, including multiple iterations of the Forbidden Gospel. Each entry recorded the Gospel's concealment, sometimes in monastic vaults, sometimes in private chapels, and occasionally buried beneath consecrated altars. One notation from 1748 described how Benedict XIV ordered the texts locked away for the edification of the learned, yet restricted from broader access. A later marginal edition by a 19th-century archivist lamented that the documents await a day when the faithful can bear fuller truth. This archive, forgotten by time and tradition, offered a comprehensive ledger of the Gospel's suppressed journey through centuries of papal caution and compromise. Marcella spent hours photographing entries and cross-referencing them with her field discoveries. She realized that this hidden inventory was the Vatican's own confessiona tacit acknowledgement that the Gospel's radical message had been both feared and valued. The listings detailed preservation methods, some copies stored in wax-sealed iron chests, others encrypted with ciphers known only to select secretaries. The archive also contained letters from diplomats who had negotiated discreet transfers of fragments to allied monasteries, a testament to a network of invisible custodians operating within the Church's highest echelons. Emerging from the archive's hushed gloom, Marcella felt the weight of history shift beneath her feet. The Vatican's hidden archive was more than a repository of forgotten texts. It was a living chronicle of institutional tension between the desire to protect authority and the impulse to preserve truth. In its dusty ledgers, she had found the Church's unspoken admission that even the most formidable powers must reckon with the enduring force of a gospel that refused to be silenced. Marcella's investigation led her to a modern controversy that mirrored medieval strife. In 1992, during renovations of a provincial cathedral in southern France, laborers uncovered a small stone chest beneath the foundation of the nave. Inside lay parchment fragments bearing the Forbidden Gospel's unmistakable script alongside a vellum copy of the Gospel of Mary. Initial media reports sensationalized the find, framing it as evidence that the Church had long hidden teachings that elevated Mary Magdalene. Faced with public pressure, local bishops issued statements downplaying the fragments as forgeries, and the materials were swiftly reburied under a newly laid altar floor. Determined to document this episode, Marcella obtained court records and conservation logs through the French Ministry of Culture's archives. The logs detailed how forensic analysis had dated the fragments to the late 5th century and confirmed pigment composition consistent with regional workshops of the period. Yet official ecclesiastical directives instructed archivists to classify the materials as insufficiently authenticated, effectively halting further study. Scholars from the University of Montpellier who had collaborated on initial tests were later excluded from follow-up research, their papers summarily removed from academic journals. Marcella interviewed surviving local conservators who described feeling pressured by diocesan officials concerned about scandal. One conservator recalled tears welling in her eyes as she reluctantly sealed the fragments back into the chest, knowing she was consigning history to silence. Through these testimonies, Marcella pieced together how modern ecclesiastical politics continued to echo the decisions of ancient councils, using bureaucratic mechanisms to control the narrative. In comparing analysis reports with earlier discoveries, Marcella confirmed that the French fragments belonged to the same textual family as those from Sinai and Avignon, sharing distinctive phrasing and marginal cipher marks. This modern cover-up underscored a persistent pattern. Whenever the forbidden gospel emerged, its radical message, especially concerning Mary Magdalene's role, threatened established authority. Versed in the delicate balance between revelation and restraint, Marcella recognized that despite advances in scholarship and transparency, the struggle over sacred texts remained as fierce as ever. In the shadow of St. Peter's Dome, Marcella stood beneath the colonnade of Bernini's masterpiece, pondering how the forbidden gospel had traversed both time and geography to reach this point. Beyond its theological implications, she recognized the gospel's journey as a mirror to the evolution of faith itself, one that moved from secret catacombs and desert monasteries into the digital age, where every fragment could be shared with a global audience. Determined to democratize access, Marcella launched a secure online portal for scholars, theologians, and lay readers to examine high-resolution images, translations, and annotations of every recovered piece. The platform employed advanced encryption to protect sensitive data while allowing collaborative study across continents. Within weeks of its launch, the portal attracted hundreds of registered users from a seminary in Nairobi to a university in Sao Paulo, eager to engage directly with the text. Online forums buzzed with discussions about the gospel's egalitarian ethics and its potential to enrich contemporary debates on inclusion within church structures. Yet with visibility came new challenges. Attempts to hack the portal surfaced, aimed at erasing or altering the document corpus. Marcella, anticipating such threats, had implemented blockchain-based timestamping for each upload, ensuring the original texts remained verifiable. When the first intrusion occurred, she and her technical team traced the breach to an IP range linked to Vatican administrative server's stark reminder that institutional impulses to control sacred narratives persisted even in cyberspace. Undeterred, Marcella rallied support from digital rights advocates and academic consortia to fortify the portal's security and reaffirm its mission to make the forbidden gospel a living dialogue rather than a relic confined to dusty archives. As she moderated a virtual symposium featuring experts in early Christianity, feminist theology, and digital humanities, Marcella felt a surge of hope. Here, in a virtual agora, free from geographical and hierarchical constraints, the gospel's radical vision of shared witness, mutual service, and unguarded compassion found its most fitting home. Beyond the heat and dust of earlier expeditions, Marcella's quest led her to the archives of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, housed within a fortified wing of the Yeni Kami complex in Istanbul. The Patriarchal Library, long shuttered to foreign researchers, reluctantly granted Marcella access after she presented authenticated Vatican credentials and a letter of support from the Ecumenical Patriarchate itself. There, tucked between Byzantine lectionaries and liturgical manuals, she discovered a gilded iconostasis panel dating to the 10th century. Behind it lay a hollow cavity containing a vellum scroll, remarkably preserved beneath a layer of beeswax and resin. The scroll bore a continuation of the Forbidden Gospel's narrative, rendered in classical Greek uncials with distinctive elongations on key letter-san artistic flourish, linking it to Constantinople's famed scriptoria. Unrolling the scroll revealed a uniquely Eastern rendition of the text, one that wove in local theological motifs of deification and theosis. In passages absent from Western fragments, Jesus was portrayed as inviting believers into divine communion through shared Eucharistic practice, emphasizing communal participation in the sacrament as the true path to spiritual unity. Here, women and men alike were described as temples of the living Word, a phrase that resonated deeply with early Orthodox mysticism. Marginal glosses in dark green ink referenced writings of Gregory Palamas and Photios the Great, suggesting an ongoing dialogue between the Gospel's radical egalitarianism and Constantinople's own contemplative traditions. To authenticate the scroll, Marcella collaborated with Dr. Sophia Demetriou, a specialist in Byzantine codicology. Together, they conducted pigment analysis on the ochre and verdigris paints, matching them to sources documented in imperial workshop records. Radiocarbon dating of hidden fibers within the beeswax seal aligned with a mid-10th century time frame, reinforcing the scroll's provenance. Under ultraviolet inspection, faint undertext emerged, indicating that the scroll had been repurposed from an earlier homily collectiona testament to the resourcefulness of Eastern custodians who prioritized the preservation of the Gospel's essence over rigid, archival protocols. As Marcella digitized the scroll's contents, she felt the breadth of the Gospel's journey stretch across cultures and centuries. What began in Roman catacombs had found its way into Byzantine sanctuaries, inspiring theologians and monastics to reinterpret its message within their own spiritual frameworks. In that moment, the Forbidden Gospel's true power became clear. It transcended borders and doctrines, animating diverse communities in pursuit of shared wisdom and compassionate fellowship. Hidden among the papers of an Aegean microfiche archive, Marcella discovered correspondence between a 20th century Vatican diplomat and Eastern Orthodox clergy regarding the Forbidden Gospel. The diplomat, Count Lorenzo di Valente, had served as apostolic nuncio to Greece after World War II. His letters, written in elegant Italian cursive, revealed that he had encountered the Constantinople scroll during confidential ecumenical talks in 1954. Aware of the Vatican's cautious stance, he arranged for microfilm copies to be secretly produced and smuggled back to Romian Act, reflecting both his devotion to unity and his conviction that the Gospel's message could bridge long-standing divisions between Western and Eastern traditions. Through microfilm readers supplied by a retired Greek archivist living in Thessaloniki, Marcella examined Di Valente's correspondence stored on brittle reels. His dispatches chronicled efforts to share the Gospel with select seminary professors in Milan and Paris, advocating its study as a tool for reconciliation in the post-Vatican II era. However, he lamented in private notes that bureaucratic inertia and fear of controversy relegated these initiatives to dead letters. Microfilm frames revealed marginal annotations, too dangerous for publication traced in the nuncio's own hand. In a sorrowful postscript, Count Di Valente wrote that he buried the microfilms in his family villa's wine cellar before returning to Italy, hoping future generations would unearth them when the church was more ready. Guided by Di Valente's instructions, Marcella and Luca traveled to his ancestral villa in the Piedmont Hills. In a crumbling stone cellar, tucked behind earthenware jars, they found the original microfilm canisters. Under careful supervision, they ran the reels through a restored reader, transmitting high-resolution scans to secure servers. The images included not only passages of the Gospel, but also Count de Valente's reflections on its potential to transform Christian relations across East and West. The diplomat's clandestine diplomacy underscored the Gospel's capacity to inspire collaboration far beyond its 4th-century origins. His courage revealed that, even within modern ecclesiastical corridors, individuals had risked their career sand, perhaps more to preserve a text they believed held the power to heal ancient rifts. In honoring his legacy, Marcella recognized that the Forbidden Gospel's true mission was not merely preservation, but the cultivation of unity rooted in shared revelation. In the cool hush of the Apostolic Palace's private study, the Pope confronted the Forbidden Gospel's implications with the weight of 1,000 years pressing down on his shoulders. Requests for clarity had flooded the Secretariat's inbox from theologians, calling for openness to conservative bishops demanding suppression. Late one evening, as a storm rumbled over Rome, the pontiff summoned his closest advisers to a confidential session. Laurelwood-paneled walls bore portraits of predecessors who had grappled with crises far less incendiary than a newly surfaced gospel that questioned the very structure of ecclesiastical authority. Seated around a polished mahogany table, cardinals reviewed Marcella's authenticated documents, paleographic analyses, and digital portal's user logs. One advisor cautioned that public acknowledgement would spark schism and empower radical movements within the Church. Another argued that transparency and dialogue could reclaim moral credibility in an era of waning trust. The Pope felt torn between his pastoral duty to shepherd the faithful toward truth and his responsibility to protect the unity and safety of the institution he led. Outside, sheets of rain slid down stained glass windows, as if mirroring the tears of doubt in his heart. When the pontiff finally spoke, his voice was measured but resolute. He acknowledged the Gospel's historical authenticity and its profound message of communal stewardship, yet warned that sudden revelation without careful guidance could fracture fragile bonds. He proposed creating a mixed commission of lay experts, theologians, and ecumenical partners to study the text openly over the coming years, emphasizing slow discernment rather than abrupt prescription or uncritical celebration. In doing so, he sought to balance reverence for tradition with the imperative of truth-seeking. As the meeting adjourned, the Pope remained alone at the table, reviewing the night's discussion. Candles guttered softly in sconces, casting flickering light on centuries of accumulated wisdom and error. He knew that his decision would shape the Church's path forward, determining whether it could embrace a vision that honored all voices or retreat into the silence of secrecy. In that moment, the pontiff faced the dilemma at the heart of faith, whether to guard the past or to let history's hidden gospel guide the future. Under the pale glow of moonlight, a clandestine assembly gathered amid the ruins of Old St. Paul's, its shattered columns, a silent testament to centuries of upheaval. Word of the Forbidden Gospel had reached a small circle of dissident clergy and lay scholars who believed its teachings demanded more than academic debate. They called for action. Marcella walked among them, her lantern illuminating faces etched with resolve. Among the group was Father Matteo Rossi, expelled from his diocese for advocating inclusive liturgies, and Professor Elena Russo, freshly returned from cryptologic fieldwork. Together they formed a midnight congregation, meeting away from prying eyes to discuss how best to honor the Gospel's call to shared witness. Seated on weathered marble fragments, the congregation read aloud passages that proclaimed, "Blessed are the humble who serve each other," and "Let no voice be silenced in the house of faith." As the words filled the cool night air, participants closed their eyes, imagining communities built on mutual care rather than hierarchy. They debated practical steps, drafting a confidential pastoral letter urging small parishes to adopt gender-inclusive language, organizing underground workshops on the Gospel's history, and establishing safe havens for theologians whose scholarship challenged entrenched norms. Each proposal reflected the Gospel's radical emphasis on service and equality, forging a quiet revolution within the Church's margins. When a distant guard's footsteps echoed through the nave, the gathering fell silent. Marcella extinguished her lantern, and others stowed their notes in waterproof satchels. Moments later, as they slipped away along hidden passageways, the ruins resumed their vigil, cradling the echoes of an evening when faith and courage converged under Rome's ancient stones. That midnight congregation, born of necessity and conviction, embodied the forbidden gospel's enduring whisper. That transformation begins not in grand declarations, but in the hushed commitment of those who gather to listen, to learn, and to serve one another. Late one afternoon, Marcella found herself standing before a weathered door in a narrow Lyonnais side street, its peeling blue paint a relic of medieval guild halls. Behind it lay the archives of the École Biblique, where a Baroque chest of oak and iron rested beneath a vaulted ceiling frescoed with angels in flight. Inside, secured by an engraved brass clasp, she discovered a 7th-century codex labeled in faint Greek letters as the Gospel of Mary, though distinct from the more familiar Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Its opening pages bore unmistakable echoes of the forbidden Gospel passages, proclaiming Mary as the bearer of life and instructing followers to weep not for her absence, but rejoice in her witness. As she carefully unbound the codex, Marcella noted that its parchment leaves were sewn together with crimson silk threads dyed from regional madder roots, suggesting production in a Syrian scriptorium before being carried westward by pilgrims. The textual layout mirrored that of known fragments, Greek uncial script interspersed with later Coptic glosses, offering explanatory notes on communal leadership and the role of women in early liturgical assemblies. One gloss attributed to a scribe named Pachomios argued that Mary's witness validated all testimonies, regardless of social status or gender, a radical claim echoing the Gospel's core egalitarian ethos. To verify the manuscript's provenance, Marcella enlisted Dr. Sophia Demetriou's expertise once more. Multispectral imaging revealed an underlying undertext. Portions of a lost letter from Bishop Athanasius, condemning the Gospel of Mary, alongside other non-canonical works. The presence of this undertext confirmed that custodians had deliberately repurposed condemned writings to preserve Mary's testament while conforming to ecclesiastical censure. Radiocarbon dating of residual binding fibers placed the manuscript's assembly between 620 and 650 CE, a turbulent period marked by theological debates over Christ's nature and widespread monastic migration. In Lyon, Marcella convened a small circle of scholars Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Protestanto read aloud the Codex's passages under the hush of the archive's hush. As they listened, murmurs of astonishment filled the room. Here was Mary, not simply as disciple, but as leader, her voice woven into the earliest fabric of Christian testimony. Their discussion turned to the implications for modern faith communities, pondering how Mary's restored prominence might reshape conversations on inclusion and shared authority. That day in Lyon, Marcella saw firsthand how the Gospel of Mary functioned as a vital complement to the forbidden gospel, amplifying its message that no soul, male or female, was ever meant to stand at the margins of divine revelation. In a narrow cloister of the Sorbonne's medieval library, Marcella unearthed legal records documenting an extraordinary 1,715 lawsuit against a Parisian laywoman named Eleonore Dupont. She had been accused of disseminating unauthorized scripture after clandestinely circulating handwritten copies of the forbidden gospel among her salon's intellectual circle. The case file preserved in fragile paper volumes bound with twine contained Eleonore's own testimony, She spoke passionately of the Gospel's teaching that all souls, without exception, bear the light of God. Her defense argued that as a devout Catholic, she sought only to deepen her fellow believers' understanding, not to incite schism. Yet the court, influenced by theologians aligned with the Sorbonne's faculty of theology, declared her actions seditious. Marcella carefully transcribed the trial minutes, noting how Eleanor's eloquent speeches had swayed public sentiment before conservative voices prevailed. The court ordered her writings and thousands of letters detailing her study group publicly burned on the Pont Neuf, a demoralizing spectacle witnessed by jeering crowds. Despite the verdict, fragments of her letters survived, smuggled to sympathetic friends in Lyon and Rouen. These scraps later re-emerged in private collections, bearing marginal notes that echoed Eleanor's insistence on personal conscience and communal study. To authenticate these documents, Marcella collaborated with paleographers at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, who confirmed the handwriting matched known examples of Eleanor's correspondence. Chemical analysis of the ink and paper placed the materials firmly in the early 18th century. In reviewing the trial records, Marcella was struck by the enduring power of a text that inspired a laywoman to risk reputation and freedom in pursuit of spiritual equity. Fragments of Eleanor's letters once, slated for the flame surfaced centuries later as testament to her courage and to the Gospel's persistent appeal outside clerical confines. As Marcella closed the final pages of the dossier, she reflected on how Éléonore Dupont's case illustrated the Gospel's democratic impulse. Faith belongs not to institutions alone, but to every individual willing to seek truth. Her story reaffirmed that the forbidden Gospel's legacy lay as much in the lives it transformed as in the manuscripts it survived. When an unexpected email landed in Marcella's inbox, bearing the subject line, "Forbidden Gospel," she hesitated before opening it. The message contained a single encrypted attachment tagged Vatican Servers 2026, along with a note, "You're not alone." Behind her laboratory's modest facade, a group of sympathetic Vatican IT specialists had surreptitiously captured internal documents and hidden the files in a secure cloud vault. Marcella's pulse quickened as she decrypted a trove of redacted memos, press releases, and internal reviews evidence that sections of the Forbidden Gospel had been quietly circulated among select clergy under academic pretenses for decades. One document, dated 2004, revealed a covert project code named Operation Ophion, in which the Secretariat of State had commissioned discrete translations of gospel fragments to prepare for eventual controlled disclosure. Another memo outlined a media strategy devised in 2012 in anticipation of leaks, suggesting a staged revelation designed to emphasize continuity rather than rupture. Perhaps most shocking was an internal email warning that a planned public lecture by a Jesuit scholar would be canceled if it mentioned the Gospel's implications for women's ordination. Throughout the files ran a thread of institutional anxiety. Even as the Church publicly reaffirmed its commitment to transparency, officials privately engaged in damage control to contain the Gospel's more radical teachings. Marcella realized the stakes had shifted. The Forbidden Gospel was no longer merely an archaeological and theological curiosity. It had become a live issue within digital power structures. She enlisted cybersecurity allies to mirror the files across multiple independent servers, ensuring that any attempt to suppress them would only spread them further. Within hours, a secure academic consortium gained access, sparking immediate debate about consent, confidentiality, and the ethics of whistleblowing in religious institutions. As news of the hack reverberated through scholarly networks and religious publications, Marcella recognized a profound paradox. The same document that had been buried, burned, and barred for centuries had found its way into the digital public square, not through official channels, but through acts of quiet rebellion by insiders. In that moment, the hacker's revelation felt like the culmination of a long saga testament to the gospel's enduring momentum, propelled by those willing to defy secrecy in pursuit of collective enlightenment. The danger of discovery crept closer when midnight searches of the Vatican Library's storage vault began turning up missing cartons of microfilm and digital backups. Marcella received a tip from a trusted friend within the Guardia Svizzera dossier had been dispatched for secure review by the Secretariat of State. Realizing that her own lab was no longer safe, she acted swiftly under the cloak of darkness. In a locked utility closet, she transferred the most sensitive fragments and metadata onto a discreet, untraceable storage device. As fluorescent emergency lights hummed above, she replaced the cartons with identical decoys, ensuring that any cursory inspection would miss the real evidence. Her plan hinged on the cooperation of Father Matteo Rossi, the dissident priest from the Midnight Congregation, who had secured passage for a diplomatic pouch marked ecumenical correspondence. At dawn, Marcella met him in a deserted corridor near the Apostolic Palace's service lift. With solemn nods, they exchanged the device for a sealed parchment scroll. The device held digital facsimiles of every recovered gospel fragment, while the scroll contained fragile physical samples slated for transport to a safe location under embassy protection. Both items represented the culmination of years of clandestine scholarship, now hurtling toward an uncertain fate. Later that day, Marcella learned that the cartons she'd left behind had been examined and deemed inconsequential mere duplicates with inconsequential excerpts. Meanwhile, Father Rossi's diplomatic pouch slipped through the Vatican gates unnoticed, bound for a neutral embassy where archivists awaited its arrival. Marcella felt a bittersweet relief, knowing her work had outmaneuvered institutional scrutiny, yet acutely aware of the personal risk she had assumed. The episode reminded her that preserving truth often demands stealth and sacrifice, especially when powerful interests seek to control the narrative. In securing passage for the Gospel's fragments beyond the Vatican's reach, Marcella affirmed a core principle, that knowledge enthralled by secrecy gains its truest strength when entrusted to a broader community. With the device and scroll en route to safety, she prepared to face whatever consequences awaited her own position, and to continue championing a gospel that refused to remain hidden. Marcella watched with measured satisfaction as the diplomatic pouch containing the last physical fragments of the forbidden gospel crossed international borders under the protection of an embassy seal. Simultaneously, the encrypted storage device she had smuggled out of the Vatican Library uploaded its contents to mirrored servers in universities from Toronto to Tokyo, safeguarding the digital corpus against any single point of failure. In that moment, the gospel's survival shifted from a sequence of secret recoveries to a collective act of stewardship, a decentralized archive maintained by scholars, theologians, and concerned laypeople around the globe. Marcella reflected on how the gospel's journey had come full circle. Once buried beneath Rome's sacred stones, it now floated freely in digital ether, accessible to anyone with the will to seek it. Despite her triumph, Marcella remained vigilant. News outlets had begun to report on the leak of Vatican documents, though few mentioned the forbidden gospel by name. Rumors circulated of internal investigations and discreet inquiries aimed at tracing the source of the breach. She updated her security protocols nightly, rotated encryption keys, and relied on her network of trusted colleagues to monitor for any sign of countermeasures. Yet even as she navigated these challenges, she derived hope from the outpouring of academic collaboration. Papers, podcasts, and online seminars arose within days, exploring the gospel's theological implications for ecclesiology, gender equality, and interfaith dialogue. Young scholars posted video essays interpreting passages once doomed to oblivion, while grassroots faith communities organized reading circles to reflect on the text's call for mutual service. Marcella realized that the Gospel's radical message had sparked a quiet revolution in how people conceived the life of faith. No longer confined to elite archives or whispered in cloistered corridors, its teachings now informed public discourse and inspired practical initiatives: food, cooperatives, community dialogue projects, and new theological curricula that honored the voices of women and laity alike. The Gospel's survival, she understood, depended not on secrecy but on engagement, encountering its words, wresting meaning from them, and embodying their vision of shared dignity. As dawn broke over her study, Marcella felt the pulse of a global community, united by discovery and driven by the Gospel's enduring promise that every soul, irrespective of station or gender, bears the light of truth. As conversations around the forbidden gospel gained momentum, an international symposium convened at the University of Cambridge, bringing together leading scholars from diverse disciplines. Marcella found herself seated between experts in feminist theology and historians of early Christianity, each eager to probe the gospel's implications for contemporary faith. Papers addressed its radical teaching of spiritual equality, tracing lines from 4th century contexts to 21st century debates on ordination and lay ministry. During a panel discussion, Marcella presented her findings on the gospel's maroon-framed illuminations, showing how visual marginalia in medieval copies emphasized passages about communal care. The audience responded with thoughtful questions, debating whether such art constituted a form of protest art as much as devotional practice. In hallway conversations, she encountered voices she never expected: Vatican, appointed theologians who, quietly curious, admitted that the gospel's ethics resonated with their own concerns about declining clergy numbers and calls for a more participatory church. Others, skeptical but respectful, urged caution, warning that incorporating non-canonical texts into liturgy risked undermining the integrity of established sacraments. Yet even these critics acknowledged the value of open dialogue, a milestone in itself, considering the centuries of suppression. As the symposium concluded, attendees drafted a joint statement affirming the gospel's historical authenticity and inviting ecclesial bodies worldwide to engage it through structured study rather than prescription. That evening, Marcella walked the ancient college courtyards beneath cloisters, bathed in lamplight, reflecting on how far the gospel had traveled from hidden vaults and secret convents to an open academic forum where its merits could be debated on equal footing. The symposium's collaborative spirit embodied the gospel's message that truth thrives not in isolation but in shared inquiry. Marcella sensed that this event marked a turning point where the forbidden gospel ceased to be merely a subject of clandestine enthusiasm and became part of the broader Christian conversation. As she gazed upward at the Gothic arches, she felt both relief and anticipation, knowing that the journey ahead of translation, interpretation, and communal application had only just begun. In a modest seminar room at the Pontifical Gregorian University, a pioneering pilot program was launched to integrate the forbidden gospel into continuing education courses for clergy. Marcella was invited to co-teach alongside a Jesuit scholar and an Eastern Orthodox theologian, reflecting the text's ecumenical potential. Over 6 weeks, seminarians and priests studied translations, examined liturgical adaptations, and engaged in guided reflections on passages advocating shared leadership and mutual service. Week after week, participants reported that the gospel's emphasis on communal discernment reshaped their understanding of parish ministry, inspiring small group initiatives in their home dioceses. One session, devoted to the gospel's account of women at the tomb, prompted emotionally charged discussion. A seminarian spoke of his grandmother, a devout catechist barred from formal roles, and how the text's affirmation of her witness brought closure to old resentments. A retired priest recounted deploying the Gospel's call to bind each other's wounds in hospice chaplaincy, finding renewed purpose in collaborative care. Even skeptics acknowledged that, regardless of dogmatic status, the Gospel provided practical guidance for a church wrestling with declining engagement and calls for reform. Surveys conducted before and after the course revealed significant shifts. Participants reported increased openness to lay involvement in liturgy, greater appreciation for women's contributions, and a willingness to explore non-canonical sources in theological formation. Marcella and her colleagues compiled these findings into a comprehensive report recommending the Gospel's inclusion in seminary curricula on a provisional basis. Their proposal underscored the importance of critical engagement over outright rejection, inviting ecclesiastical authorities to consider a more nuanced relationship with the text. As the final class concluded, Marcella felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The gospel that once lay hidden beneath marble altars, coded in secret ciphers, and burned by fearful flames, now lived in the hands and hearts of those preparing for ministry. In that moment, she understood that its true power lay not merely in scholarly discovery, but in the transformation of souls and communities committed to sharing its vision of equality and love. A crisp autumn breeze stirred the leaves outside the Vatican press office as Marcella Vieri prepared for her most public challenge yet, a press briefing aimed at framing the forbidden gospel in a context of constructive dialogue. With carefully drafted talking points, in hand emphasizing historical authenticity, theological nuance, and pastoral sensitivity, she entered the ornate briefing room where rows of journalists awaited. Behind her, staff displayed high-resolution images of manuscript fragments and reconstructions of marginal ciphers, each slide underscoring the Gospel's verified provenance. As she spoke, her voice was measured and earnest, recounting centuries of concealment alongside examples of the text's ethical vision for communal care. She acknowledged the Church's legitimate concerns about doctrinal unity, yet appealed to the principle that truth revealed in time can strengthen faith rather than undermine it. Reporters pressed for immediate reactions from Vatican spokespeople, who issued a statement praising Marcella's scholarship but urging patience as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith undertook a thorough and prayerful review. Headlines the next morning balanced the promise of open inquiry. With reminders of the Church's cautionary history of disruptive revelations and editorial tightrope, reflecting the delicate politics at stake, faithful commentators on various platforms lauded Marcella's transparency and the press office's willingness to engage, while critics warned that the Gospel's radical teachings on gender and authority posed risks to institutional coherence. Through it all, Marcella maintained a calm demeanor, fielding questions about potential schisms and emphasizing that meaningful reform requires both courage and charity. In the days that followed, the press briefing sparked town hall-style discussions in diocesan centers from Buenos Aires to Manila. Parish newsletters featured excerpts of the Gospel alongside pastors' reflections, and online forums buzzed with laypeople sharing personal reactions. Amid the media whirlwind, Marcella received messages from seminarians, nuns, and faithful laity, expressing gratitude for her balanced approach and expressing hope that the Church might embrace this hidden testimony as a complement rather than a contradiction to established Scripture. As the storm of coverage subsided into thoughtful commentary, Marcella recognized that the Vatican press office's measured response in either outright dismissal nor uncritical endorsement had opened a crucial window for discernment. By bringing the forbidden gospel into a public forum governed by respectful inquiry, She had helped transform it from a whispered secret into a living conversation, shaping the future of faith communities worldwide. When translators from diverse cultures encountered the Forbidden Gospel, their renderings each bore the imprint of local linguistic rhythms and theological emphases. Marcella coordinated a comparative study that assembled translations in French, Spanish, Mandarin, Swahili, and Arabic, among others. In Seoul, a Korean team rendered the Gospel's call to bind one another's wounds as a phrase closely linked to the Buddhist concept of compassionate service, fostering interreligious dialogue. In Rio de Janeiro, Brazilian Portuguese translators wove Afro-Brazilian devotional cadences into the verses about communal feasting, resonating with candomblé-influenced worship. Mandarin scholars in Taipei emphasized terms signifying collective harmony, interpreting the Gospel's structure as an affirmation of Confucian values of mutual responsibility. Each translation session revealed new facets of the text. Arabic exegetes drew parallels between the Gospel's advocacy for shared leadership and early Sufi conceptions of fellowship, while Swahili versions incorporated coastal Tanzanian Swahili poetic conventions when describing voices rising as one. Marcella convened virtual workshops where translators compared notes, discussed challenges of rendering key Greek and Latin terms, and explored how cultural idioms could enrich rather than dilute the Gospel's core message of radical equality. Clarifying debates arose over whether to retain literal fidelity or to adapt phrases for intelligibility, prompting robust discourse about the balance between historical accuracy and pastoral effectiveness. To support these efforts, Marcella's team developed a multilingual digital lexicon, mapping original manuscript terms to each language's equivalent, preserving semantic nuance across contexts. They also produced audio recordings featuring native speakers chanting the Gospel's verses, from the haunting cadences of Ethiopian liturgical chant to the resonant vowels of Irish Gaelic hymnody. These recordings underscored the Gospel's universal appeal, demonstrating how a text once hidden beneath papal secrecy could become a source of inspiration for millions around the globe. By observing these translations, Marcella recognized that the Forbidden Gospel's journey was not complete until its words found a home in every tongue and culture. Each adaptation proved that the Gospel's radical call to communal care transcended its origins, speaking anew in every context. As she listened to voices across continents lift the same verses in myriad rhythms, Marcella felt a profound affirmation that truth, once uncovered, resonates most powerfully when expressed in the language of the heart. The hushed chamber of an ecumenical council convened in Geneva in 1986 marked a watershed moment for the Forbidden Gospel. Invited by progressive Protestant leaders, Marcella presented authenticated fragments alongside translations in 4 languages, framing the text as a bridge between traditions. Delegates Reformed, Anglican, Methodist, and Lutheran gathered around a circular oak table beneath vaulted ceilings draped with banners representing each denomination. As she read aloud passages advocating communal stewardship and inclusive leadership, representatives nodded thoughtfully, some closing their eyes in prayerful reflection. A bishop from the Church of England noted how the Gospel's emphasis on children of all genders as heirs to the promise resonated with emerging dialogues on women's ordination. A Reformed theologian spoke of its potential to ground social justice initiatives in scriptural precedent, while a Lutheran scholar connected its communal ethic to the doctrine of the priesthood of all believers. The council produced a consensus statement affirming the Gospel's historical significance and recommending that churches integrate its teachings into ecumenical worship services. It called for further collaborative study and the development of liturgical resources that honored the text's radical call to unity. Marcella watched as observers recorded the proceedings, knowing that this unprecedented endorsement by a broad spectrum of Protestant bodies signaled a new era of openness. The forbidden gospel, long shrouded in secrecy, now stood at the center of interdenominational cooperation, its message poised to influence liturgies and social ministries across continents. A silver-haired nun, Sister Helena Marchand, tapped nervously on the ornate gate of the Vatican's Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life. She carried a petition signed by hundreds of religious sisters worldwide, urging official recognition of the forbidden gospel's insights into women's ministry. Marcella had helped draft the petition, gathering testimonies from congregations in Manila, Nairobi, and Sao Paulo. Inside the marble foyer, Sister Marchand presented the bound petition to the prefect, who received it with solemn courtesy before retreating to consult advisors. Weeks later, a formal response acknowledged the sister's devotion, but cited the need for careful theological study before any doctrinal pronouncements. Undeterred, Sister Marchand and Marcella organized a global colloquium of women religious, convening in Assisi beneath frescoed walls depicting St. Francis's embrace of all creation. Over 5 days, the assembly reflected on gospel passages portraying women as foundational witnesses to resurrection and advocates of communal healing. Workshops explored practical applications, expanding roles for sisters in parish leadership, forming co-educational theological study groups, and integrating gospel readings into daily offices. Participants drafted guidelines for contemplative practice rooted in the text's egalitarian vision, aiming to renew monastic life across continents. When they returned to Rome to present their findings, the Vatican announced the formation of a study commission on consecrated life, explicitly charged with examining non-canonical sources, including the forbidden gospel. For Marcella and Sister Marchand, this institutional acknowledgement, however, tentative represented a profound shift, a move from suppression toward genuine engagement with the gospel's transformative potential for women's ministry. At the historic University of Vienna, where scholars of medieval Christendom had long debated lost texts, Marcella led a symposium on manuscript preservation and ethical stewardship. In the grand lecture hall, adorned with portraits of luminaries like Bede and Hildegard, she demonstrated advanced imaging techniques for reading palimpsests and recovering obscured marginalia. Attendees librarians, conservators, and digital humanities experts crowded around workstations equipped with multispectral cameras, experimenting with filters that revealed erased annotations in multiple fragments of the forbidden gospel. As whispered exclamations filled the aisles, Marcella emphasized the importance of non-invasive methods to protect fragile materials, advocating protocols for digitization that balanced accessibility with preservation. Their collaborative efforts led to the development of an open-access repository of best practices, funded by European cultural heritage grants. Institutions across the continent, from Oxford's Bodleian to Florence's Biblioteca Medicia, adopted these guidelines, ensuring that other suppressed texts could emerge from obscurity without risking further damage. Marcella's Viennese symposium thus catalyzed a broader movement, one that placed ethical responsibility at the forefront of manuscript recovery and scholarship. Under the rose-tinted light of Prague's Castle Library, Marcella discovered a cache of 17th-century diplomatic dispatches describing attempts to broker the forbidden gospel's acceptance within Eastern Europe's Orthodox and Catholic communities. These dispatches sealed with the Habsburg imperial crest-tailed exchanges between envoys in Vienna and Istanbul, who believed that the gospel's teachings on communal stewardship could soften sectarian divides. The envoys recorded private audiences with patriarchs who, intrigued, commissioned local scribes to translate select passages into Church Slavonic for monastic review. Though political tensions ultimately dissolved these efforts, the dispatches confirmed a centuries-old aspiration for unity inspired by the Gospel's radical vision. As Marcella catalogued the reports, she recognized the Gospel's persistent role as a bridge across geopolitical and religious chasms. Its message, once an object of fear, had consistently resurfaced in moments of tension as a potential catalyst for reconciliation. These diplomatic archives, long ignored, now offered proof that the Gospel's capacity to foster dialogue extended far beyond ecclesiastical circles. Amid the flags of the United Nations in New York, a groundbreaking interfaith meeting assembled theologians, scholars, and faith leaders to discuss the Forbidden Gospel's universal themes. Hosted by UNESCO, the gathering convened in a glass-walled hall overlooking the East River, symbolizing transparency and global connection. Representatives from Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and indigenous traditions read aloud, translated excerpts emphasizing compassion, mutual service, and the sacred value of every individual. A rabbi highlighted parallels with the Hebrew prophet's calls for justice, while a Buddhist monk resonated with the Gospel's injunction to bind one another's wounds. A Sufi scholar spoke of shared stewardship as akin to the Islamic concept of Khalifa humanity's responsibility as vicegerents on earth. The meeting concluded with the Manhattan Declaration on Shared Sacred Texts, a resolution affirming that passages from the Forbidden Gospel could enrich interreligious dialogue and collaborative social initiatives. UNESCO pledged to fund translation and educational programs, bridging sacred traditions. For Marcella, this global affirmation represented the culmination of centuries of concealment. The Gospel had transcended its origins as an illicit Christian text to become a universal testament to human dignity and solidarity. In the digital heart of Silicon Valley, a team of developers and faith scholars collaborated with Marcella to create an interactive app named The Light of Many. Using augmented reality, users could point their smartphones at churches, chapels, and public spaces to reveal hidden markers tied to the Forbidden Gospel's history, QR codes discreetly placed near frescoes, plaques marking crypt entrances, or AR overlays on art depicting gospel narratives. The app also offered daily reflections, community forums, and guided meditation audios featuring readings in multiple languages. Within weeks of its launch, The Light of Many topped educational and spiritual app charts, engaging both tech-savvy millennials and seasoned theologians. The app's success demonstrated how modern technology could amplify a once forbidden text, turning ancient secrecy into an open-source spiritual journey. Marcella marveled at users' posts. A group of students traced gospel markers on a pilgrimage through Andalusia, while a refugee center in Athens organized group reflections using the app's multilingual features. The Gospel's reach, once limited to scribal circles, now extended through digital networks into lives around the globe. A consortium of theological seminaries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America launched an online certificate program titled Shared Light, The Forbidden Gospel in Global Context. Marcella served as academic director, designing a curriculum that combined historical study, literary analysis, and practical ministry workshops. More than 50 students enrolled in the first cohort, representing over 80 countries. Participants engaged in peer-reviewed research projects on topics such as gospel-inspired social enterprises, inclusive liturgical design, and women's leadership in community development. Student coursework revealed innovative applications. A Kenyan parish introduced community kitchens modeled on gospel teachings of shared bread. A Filipino group developed intergenerational storytelling projects, honoring women's spiritual contributions. A Brazilian seminary integrated gospel reflections into pastoral care for marginalized populations. These diverse initiatives underscore the Gospel's adaptability and its power to inform grassroots action. Pope Francis, known for his emphasis on mercy and inclusion, appointed a special commission within the Synod on Synodality to explore the Forbidden Gospel's implications for church governance. Marcella was invited as a consultant, attending sessions in the Synod Hall set within the Vatican's Synod building. There, bishops, lay experts, and religious superiors discussed synodal methods, echoing the Gospel's call for communal listening and discernment. The Commission's final report recommended experiments in shared decision-making at local diocesan levels and affirmed that exploring non-canonical texts could enrich spiritual discovery without undermining core doctrines. This papal endorsement marked the first time a head of the Catholic Church formally integrated the Forbidden Gospel into synodal processes. Marcella recognized that her work had come to influence the Church's own efforts at renewal and reform, demonstrating the text's capacity to spark meaningful institutional reflection. In a gala event at the National Gallery in London, Marcella collaborated with contemporary artists to create an immersive installation titled Echoes of the Hidden Gospel. Suspended vellum sheets bearing laser-etched passages drifted amid shafts of colored light, while ambient soundscapes of chanting and recorded testimonies filled the hall. Visitors moved through zones representing catacombs, monasteries, and council chambers, encountering projected 3D renderings of manuscript fragments and interactive stations where they could write digital marginalia reflecting on the Gospel's themes. Critics praised the installation as a masterful blending of scholarship and art. Attendees reported feeling transported across centuries, gaining both intellectual insight and emotional resonance. For Marcella, the project demonstrated how creative expression could bring ancient texts to life, inviting audiences to engage not only with historical facts, but with the Gospel's enduring call to compassionate community. Scholars and church leaders gathered at the Ecumenical Institute in Bossey, Switzerland, for a week-long retreat exploring the Forbidden Gospel's impact on inter-church relations. Each morning, participants read gospel passages in small groups before engaging in guided reflection on reconciliation, inclusion, and the role of women in ministry. Retreat sessions led to the drafting of the Bossey Covenant, a pledge among diverse Christian communities to foster collaborative ministries inspired by gospel teachings, food pantries, shared worship services, and joint advocacy for social justice. The covenant signing ceremony, held in the Institute's Lakeside Chapel, drew wide media attention, showcasing the Gospel's power to unite traditions long divided by history. Marcella watched as representatives signed their names beneath projected images of manuscript fragments, their acts symbolizing a shared commitment to embodying the Gospel's vision in practical service. Dr. Marcella Vieri stood in the twilight glow of St. Peter's Square alongside representatives from every continent as the Vatican unveiled a permanent exhibit dedicated to the Forbidden Gospel. Housed within the Vatican Museum's Branconia wing, the display featured original fragments, interactive screens detailing the text's journey, and a contemplative space where visitors could reflect on its teachings. Pope Francis sent a video message acknowledging the Gospel's historical significance and encouraging all people of faith to listen deeply to its call for mutual service. As the final ribbon fell, Marcella felt a profound sense of completion. What began as a hidden manuscript in Roman catacombs had become a living testament to human resilience, intellectual courage, and spiritual solidarity. The exhibit would welcome pilgrims, scholars, and the curious alike, ensuring that the Forbidden Gospel's message, a call to honor every voice and to serve one another in humble love, would continue to inspire future generations.